طيب. So I'm going to first introduce you. Dr. Hussein Hassan is the Associate Professor of Food Science and Technology at the Lebanese American University in Beirut. And he's also a senior food safety expert. And we are going to be talking about a very important topic, which is toxic metals in breast milk and infant formula. This was actually the first study that was done in Lebanon on this particular topic. I'm just going to introduce myself first. I'm Jana Majdoub. So I am the founder of Behind My Meals. I recently started this platform because we all know that there are issues that are happening in the area of food safety in Lebanon and health. So I'm here to address these issues and find ways so that we can better control the food, be it through the way we prepare, store, handle, and choose the foods that we're actually eating. Dr. Hussein actually happens to be a very close friend of mine. So I am very happy to be doing this live with him. So thank you so much for taking the time to do this with me. I know you have a full schedule, so I really appreciate it. What we're going to be doing first is Dr. Hussein is going to be doing a presentation. So he's going to be talking about the study, and then we're going to be talking about the reasons, and then finally we'll have concluding remarks about what are ways that we can better control for this particular topic, which actually is very alarming. I read Dr. Hussein has done several studies on this topic, so it's not one particular study. There are several studies that have been done at LAU on this particular topic, and I leave the floor to you so that you can discuss more.
Thank you, Jana, for the invitation. Thank you all for attending. Can
I just want to say, sorry, one more thing. If you guys have any comments or anything that you want to address to Dr. Hussein, please leave it under the chat, and then we will discuss them right after he presents.
Okay. So hi again. Thank you all for attending. So as Jana mentioned, our talk will be about the results of the project that we did recently at LAU, assessing the safety of breast milk and infant formula in Lebanon in terms of mycotoxins and toxic metals. Today, we will present only the toxic metals part. So, as you know, infants are very vulnerable. They are more susceptible than us since they have a restricted diet. They consume more food on a body weight basis than adults. In other words, their potential health risks when it comes to contaminants and foods are 3 times higher than for us. Breastfeeding is very important to the maternal and infant health. There are many good things about it. For example, it has antibacterial agents. It gives all the needed nutrients to the baby. It was found to improve the IQ of the baby. It creates this bonding between the mother and the child. It saves money, it protects the environment, and it was found to protect the mother against many cancers. However, in Lebanon, only 40% of 1-month-old infants and only 2% of 4 to 5 months old infants are exclusively breastfed. This has to do with the short maternity leave that we have, the lack of awareness, and the availability of infant formula all over the place. So mothers prefer to go for infant formula instead of breastfeeding, especially after going back to work starting month 2. So the infant formula...
Doesn't this also have to do with the hospitals? Like the
Definitely. Now,
hospitals in
exactly.
specific.
Some hospitals are breastfeeding friendly, but the majority are not for
Mm,
commercial reasons. So they have those deals with infant formula suppliers. So, in fact, they recommend infant formula to the baby instead of increasing awareness about breastfeeding. So infant formula can be sold as liquid or as powder, and then this powder will be reconstituted and fed as a substitute for breast milk. Now, since infant formula is not a natural product, it has many ingredients. Those ingredients are animal or plants based, and many of them contain soy in many instances instead of cow's milk.
okay.
If we compare the benefits of breast milk versus infant formula, you can see that the breast milk has way more benefits than the infant formula. The infant formula has only the essential nutrients. However, in the breast milk, we have antibodies, we have anti-allergies, anti-parasites, growth factors, which are highly needed, as we said, to give more immunity to the infant and to boost their IQ. Toxic metals like arsenic, lead, and cadmium are present everywhere, we can say. For instance, arsenic is present as part of pesticides in the wood, and antibiotics, and other veterinary products given to animals. The lead is present in the car batteries, in the plumbing systems, in paints, and cosmetics. Cadmium is present in batteries. And when the baby gets exposed to those toxic metals, they will have developmental abnormalities, low birth weight, preterm delivery for pregnant women. The baby tends to have lower IQ, autism in many instances, mental retardation, dyslexia, and cognitive decline. For all those aforementioned consequences, it's important to assess our exposure to toxic metals, whether for the pregnant woman or for the infants themselves. So we assess the toxic metals in breast milk and infant formula, and the results of our study got published in 3 articles in Q1 journals. The first article was about lead, cadmium, and arsenic in breast milk. So we collected 74 breast milk samples from different areas of Lebanon according to guidelines set by the World Health Organization. We found out that arsenic, lead, and cadmium were present in 64, 68, and 41% respectively of the samples. And if we compare the levels to those of WHO, arsenic, lead, and cadmium were present in 55.4, 56.3, 9.5% respectively. We're talking here above the limits, which is alarming, especially in terms of arsenic and
Arsenic.
lead. And
Okay.
this was the mean average for the arsenic, the cadmium, and the lead. The lead is alarming. Now, in Lebanon, we have an issue with the lead because our country is polluted, especially in light of the
Polluted. Yeah, I
garbage.
was gonna say.
Exactly, and the garbage crisis. Nowadays, many
Mm,
municipalities incinerate garbage. So the garbage incineration results in presence of lead in the air, and therefore we are breathing lead all the time. So it's not an issue only for pregnant women or infants, breastfed infants. It's also a public health issue to everyone living in Lebanon.
mhm, mhm.
These are the limits of the WHO. As you can see, for the arsenic and for the lead, we are above the limit of the WHO. For the cadmium, we are fine. Here we're talking about the average. Okay, but
Mm.
when we look at the prevalence of those three toxic metals in breast milk, the percentage is very high for the arsenic and lead.
And normally these limits are limits that happen worldwide. So these are
Exactly,
limits that are placed worldwide. There aren't
exactly.
specific differences between the countries. Okay.
Exactly. Now, if we want to compare our values to different places of the world, we can see that when it comes to arsenic, we were higher than different countries except for Bangladesh. When it comes to
Wow.
lead, yeah,
India.
when it
Yeah.
comes to lead, our values were lower than those reported in Saudi Arabia
Saudi
uh,
Arabia.
and Turkey. However, they were higher than countries like Ghana, United Arab Emirates, Cyprus, and Spain. When we look at cadmium, our results were higher than those reported in different places, except for Saudi Arabia and Spain. So the cadmium contamination was lower than in these two countries. So in other
Okay.
words,
Okay.
this is not an issue specific to Lebanon, it's a global issue. Whenever the mother is exposed to pollution, to polluted or contaminated food supply, those toxic metals will end up appearing in her breast milk.
Hmm.
Now, when we look at the main sources of those toxic metals in breast milk, it was found that when it comes to arsenic, it was mainly due to the fish and the cereal, in particular rice intake. So the more the mother consumes seafood and rice, the more likely the arsenic level will be higher in the breast milk. Now, our seafood supply, unfortunately, is not safe. We know this due to the pollution that we have in our sea. Also, we had the 2006 war, so the sea shore is contaminated in Lebanon.
Mm.
Unfortunately, our seafood supply is not safe, and this was already documented by several studies in the literature. Also, it was found that when it comes to lead, it was found that if the mother lives in a highly urbanized area, if she smokes before pregnancy, if she consumes potatoes significantly, the lead level would be high in the breast milk. So this brings us back to the pollution. For example, the samples collected from Kisarwain, since they have
Mm.
the Zouk Musbih powerhouse, which generates
Mm.
lots of pollution. So the main polluted or contaminated breast milk samples in terms of lead were in this area. Also, we found an interesting result that when the mother is more educated, the level of lead uh, reduces significantly. This has to do with the fact that the more educated the mother is, the more aware she is about lead, and therefore, for example, she makes sure that her potato supply comes from reputable sources. usually the more the mother is educated, the less likely she will smoke during pregnancy. So that's why we had this finding when it comes to a level of education.
That's very interesting. Can I just ask something? For the
So,
potatoes and the rice and the fish, was there a particular amount that they were eating throughout the week or on that particular day that basically gave an indication that this was the result of the lead that was inside the breast milk?
yes. So in our study, we gave a food frequency questionnaire to participating mothers, and we asked about different food groups. Now, we didn't ask about the quantity, we asked about the frequency. So when the
Mm.
mother consumes uh, twice per week or more potatoes, the level of lead was significantly higher compared to the mom who consumed less than twice per week potatoes.
Oh, okay.
Now,
How
why
about for the seafood?
same thing. So if we look at the seafood, so we have less than twice per week, the dark green, more than twice per
Mm.
week, the light green. So when the mother
Okay.
consumed more than twice per week seafood and more than twice per week cereals, in particular rice, the amount of arsenic in her breast milk was significantly higher uh, compared to moms who consumed less than twice per week seafood or cereals. Now, why cereals? It's
Okay,
known
very
that
interesting.
the rice is contaminated with arsenic. It's because of the
Mm.
agricultural practices. So the pesticides that we use in the
And the way it's harvested.
agricultural sector does have arsenic and lead. So that's why the potatoes were associated to lead presence in breast milk. Also in Lebanon, uh, in many areas, we use sewage and irrigation. And since the sewage passes by lead pipes in many cases, so
Mm.
the sewage itself ends up getting contaminated with lead. And since we use it in agriculture, so crops like potatoes will be severely contaminated because
Mm.
the the potato is a tuber, so it grows near the surface. That's
Ah,
why we expect to have high lead in the potatoes, knowing that potatoes will be washed, will be peeled, but still lead residues can penetrate to the core of the tuber.
okay. And the types of food that were tested, were they several types, or did you just intentionally want to check the potatoes and the seafood and the
No,
rice?
different
Oh,
food
so there were
groups.
different ones, but
Exactly,
these are the
different.
ones that were striking.
Exactly.
Okay.
Now we use the food frequency questionnaire endorsed by WHO for studies related to assessing the safety of breast milk worldwide.
Okay.
When we look at the cadmium levels, it was mainly about exposure to smoke. So
Mm.
mothers who were exposed to smoke, here we're talking about pollution,
Mm.
the level of cadmium in their breast milk was significantly higher than those who lived in kind of clean areas, far from smoke.
I would like to know where those clean areas are.
Yeah, unfortunately, before it used to be known that villages are clean, but again, due to the garbage crisis and the
It's spread out.
incineration that is taking place everywhere, unfortunately, the exposure to smoke is inevitable.
Yeah.
Another study that we published was about, as I said, the infant formula. So we're talking about aluminum, chromium, and barium, in addition to other three toxic metals that I will mention in a bit. In fact, lead, cadmium, and arsenic. Okay, so 6 toxic metals in infant formula. So we screened the Lebanese market. We collected 39 brands over 2 production dates. And go ahead.
What I wanted to ask, were these brands, they're local or they're imported brands?
We don't have local infant formula.
Yeah.
They are all imported.
Okay.
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 Now,
okay.
in many cases, they are shipped to Lebanon and only packed in Lebanon, but we don't actually produce infant formula in Lebanon.
Okay.
Okay. So if we look at the 6 toxic metals, aluminum, barium, and barium were found in 100% of samples. Chromium was found in 95% of samples, arsenic 59%, lead 8% only, cadmium 10%. So the lead wasn't present in the infant formula. This can be attributed to the fact that the source of those infant formulas are European countries. So in those countries, they don't have the lead contamination issue. They don't have the exposure to smoke, random smoke like what we have in Lebanon. Aluminum could be attributed to the packaging. Now these are the values of the infant formulas themselves. We didn't take into account the contamination in water, because remember, those infant formula needs to be diluted in or dissolved in water. And if the water used in making infant formula is not safe enough, those levels will increase for sure.
Okay.
Now, as concluding remarks, in terms of breast milk, it was found that the maternal diet and smoking habits are determinants of the presence of toxic metals in breast milk, in particular, as we said, potatoes, rice consumption, seafood consumption. However, it's important to highlight that breastfeeding has lots of benefits, which would compensate for the potential risks. And the toxic metals, once present in the breast milk, the infant body will bioaccumulate them. So they get bioaccumulated, and at some point, the levels will be in the body will be high enough to trigger the detrimental effects on the nervous system, IQ, and so on. But it's important to highlight the fact that human milk is just one of many routes of exposure. So if the breast milk is completely safe, it doesn't mean that the infant will not get exposed to these toxic metals, because they are present in the air, they are present in our food supply in the subsequent years. So it's not only about breast milk. In other words, our study does not imply that the breast milk in Lebanon should be avoided. Of course not, because the breast milk would give way more benefits than risks. And if we look at the infant formula, the levels of lead, cadmium, and arsenic were higher than those compared to breast milk, but the prevalence was lower. The average, the overall mean of lead, cadmium, and arsenic in infant formula samples compared to breast milk samples, in infant formula, the means were higher. And add to these means the potential contamination present in water, as we said. So
Okay.
that's
Okay.
why there should be surveillance programs by the government to ensure the safety of the infant formula supply. Now, in Lebanon, according to the law, any infant formula imported to Lebanon should be tested for these toxic metals once arrived to the port of Beirut.
Are you saying
However,
they should be tested or they're not
yes,
tested?
they should,
Oh,
but
they aren't being tested.
apparently not. And we shared
Okay.
those results with the concerned ministries. They promised to double check what happened, whether really samples are being taken, whether the results of those analyses are being reported to the person in charge. But something should be done about the safety of the infant formulas. When it comes to breast milk, it's important to increase awareness about the importance of getting foods from reputable suppliers, because when we say rice, potatoes, or seafood, of course, we're talking about brands that are not reputable. So it's important to always go for packed rice, for example, instead of unpacked, and to go for companies that are certified in terms of ISO or FSSC. When it comes to seafood supply, we should always inquire about the source of the seafood products that we're getting. Like in Lebanon, not all areas are safe. For example, the area between Jouni and Batroun, like including Jbel and Batroun, were found to be, those two cities were found to be safe in terms of seafood supply. Same for Sur. So it's important to inquire about the source of the fish that we get. And also, as we said, the mother should avoid smoking during pregnancy, because it was found that smoking will result in insignificant amount of toxic metals in her breast milk, and to try to stay away as much as possible from smoke. So, for example, if she lives in an area where the smoke is too much, she should expect that there is nothing she can do about it, because she will not change her area of residence just for this reason. But I mean, it should
Exactly.
be like, and unfortunately nowadays, due to the power crisis, we have more and more generators, and those
Exactly. I was
generators
gonna tell you
are releasing more pollution.
that, and even the explosion itself that happened in August.
Exactly,
I mean, I'm sure
exactly.
also this also increased a lot of pollution that's going on, be it in the capital or across that parameter. So
So,
definitely, it's not something that's easy to control, but it could be something to look into.
and it could be something for the government to take its responsibility in this regard, because the garbage crisis has ramifications on different aspects. One of them is the breast milk safety. So
Okay.
before taking questions, I would like to acknowledge the work of my colleagues, Dr. Jumana Aridi, Dr. Maya Basil, Mrs. Joelle Abikharma, who were my partners in this project, and the funding source, which is the National Center for Scientific Research in Lebanon. And
All right.
whoever
Great.
interested, I can share with you the full articles for you to get more information about what we did, since for the lack of time, I couldn't like elaborate much on the methodology and so on.
So someone is asking, yes, they do want to get it. So should I provide them with the email, with your
Yes, sure.
email? So
Yes,
that's
sure, sure.
okay. Okay, hala, I will. Anyone, if you guys have any questions, I'm going to ask a few questions, but if you guys have any, please share in the chat box so that we can take any questions that you might have. What I wanted to ask was mainly when it comes to the infant formula. So after you said that you addressed it to the government, but there's also agencies like you were saying with the WHO and other agencies that also could, shed light on this important topic. Were these findings also addressed to these agencies so that maybe measures could be taken to better control for this?
Now, our work was published, so it's available for the public. We didn't share it with WHO per se in Lebanon because, after all, they don't have any authority when it comes to our
Oh.
infant formula safety. So it's mainly the government. The government should be more strict about assessing the infant formula shipments to Lebanon, and there should be clear specifications given to infant formula importers. Now, infant formula importers, it's true that they get those infant formula from abroad, but it doesn't mean that getting infant formula from Europe means that the infant formula would be safe, because even in Europe you don't have consistency when it comes to infant formula production across Europe. So different countries may have different manufacturing practices. So that's why the importers of the infant formula should be more strict about the specifications of those infant formula, and also, as we said, the government should be more strict about surveillance programs when it comes to the infant formula supply in the country.
Okay, great. There's someone that's asking about the limits, if they can know about the limits of the toxic metals. There's also a recent study that's been done actually in all of the month of February, be it not in actually the US. It's actually a huge thing right now because everyone is talking about the toxic metals that we're finding in baby food. And what's really alarming is that they're finding it in organic food, so in organic baby products, which normally people would say, okay, organic food, which generally means that there's less pesticides, so that means there's less risk of getting these metals into these foods. So could you be able to give us some insight on this?
Yeah, so unfortunately, the term organic is misunderstood by many manufacturers. So to them,
Exactly.
getting the organic certification is more than enough to label their product as organic. However, unfortunately, many certification companies for the organic foods are not being ethical enough. And this is applicable to companies that certify for ISO 22000 and other uh, standards. Unfortunately, having the organic certification doesn't mean that the product is really organic. Because after all, when the certification body comes and gives you the organic logo, this was based on an audit, and this audit is announced. So some companies can easily manipulate their records, their data, to show to the auditor that they are organic for real, but during the other days of the year, they are not. So that's why the term organic is being misused by some companies. In many cases, the farmers don't apply pesticides, it's true, but their soil might be contaminated with toxic metals from previous years, because the soil needs several years to become toxic metals free. So that's why if the farmer this year decides not to use pesticides, it doesn't mean that the resulting crops will be organic, because some toxic residues will be left in the soil for several years. So this is
Okay.
another issue for the organic. Farmers think that the moment they stop using pesticides, it means that their crops are organic, which is again not accurate, because they need several years to reach this stage.
All right. Okay. There's someone just before I asked the question from Tonya, but the question regarding the limits of the toxic metals, these are found
Yeah.
inside the articles, right? Inside the
Yes, yes,
studies.
yes.
So if you request them from Dr. Hussein, he will be gladly providing them to
Yeah,
you.
yeah, definitely.
All right. So the question, we have another question, which is, can these toxic metals accumulate in our bodies as well and affect breast milk in the future? I mean, should we start being careful about our dietary sources from now? So even if you're not pregnant, but if you're planning on maybe in the future, is this something that we need to also look at?
Good question. According to literature, the main period of time that would affect the toxic metal in breast milk is the pregnancy and lactation. So, of
Okay.
course, pre-pregnancy period will have an effect. However, it was found that the pregnancy period itself and the lactation period together, they are the major contributors to the toxic metal contamination in breast milk from a dietary point of view.
Mm, okay, okay. But my question is, if we're going to be talking about the fish in specific and the rice and the potatoes, which we found in the study to actually have a relative amount of these metals, do we have to reduce our frequency? Because we noticed that if they're 2 times a week, it's different than when it's 3. So does the level of frequency also has to be rethought of in terms of the diet?
Now, it's not healthy to say reduce your seafood intake,
There you go.
because we all know that seafoods are super healthy, especially
Exactly.
during pregnancy. So the fact that they contain toxic metals doesn't mean we have to avoid them. We have to keep
Okay.
them because they have too many benefits, but we just need to be careful about the source. As long as
Okay.
we get the seafood from reputable sources, from clean areas, it shouldn't be a problem.
Okay.
And like
Okay.
like what we say in nutrition, it's all about moderation. So
Absolutely.
like we need to keep all those food items in the pregnant and lactating mother's diet, but she just needs to be careful about the source of those products.
Yes, it's very important also to know where you're choosing from, like you said, and to make sure that they're actually placed with ice underneath them, because you find a lot of these fish that are being sold on the streets
Exactly.
in plastic crates with literally nothing under them. And this is actually a huge risk. So these are also some examples that we can look into.
Yeah, good point that you
One person,
mentioned, Jana, about the seafood products being sold on the street, because they will be
mm,
exposed to the smoke of the cars, which
very
is
true.
another source of contamination beside the seawater itself.
Exactly. We got a question also saying, what are the recommended guidelines to choosing infant formula? So what should we look for, and what is the acceptable level for these metals? But mainly, what are the recommended guidelines? I think also the acceptable level, you've also mentioned inside the study what the acceptable
Yes,
levels are.
yes, yes.
Okay. So
Now,
how would you recommend someone who is right now has a baby or about to deliver? What are some recommendations that we can offer when they are going to be deciding to choose or go for infant formula?
Now, the first recommendation is not to give up on breastfeeding easily. Now, in Lebanon, breastfeeding is very challenging because we have a short maternity leave. We don't have support from the society, from the
Society,
hospitals.
even from the
Exactly,
society itself.
exactly.
Yeah.
So the best advice would be to keep breastfeeding for 6 months, because
Mm.
it was found that during these 6 months, providing the baby with breast milk will provide him or her with immunity. This immunity will be needed to fight any contamination once the infant formula or the solid food will be provided. So the best advice would be not to give up on breast milk easily. Now, exclusive breastfeeding is not doable to many mothers, but at least they can do mixed feeding. But don't go to the easy way out. The easy way out is to rely on infant formula from day one. uh,
Mm.
but if you decide to go for infant formula, you need to keep in mind the consequences in terms of toxic metals. So it's important to keep a balance. Include the breast milk as long as you can. Now, once you start introducing the infant formula, as our study showed, like you cannot do anything about avoiding the exposure to aluminum, barium, and chromium because they were found in almost 100% of the brands.
Mm.
So you cannot do anything about it. They are there in all the brands. But again, what you can do is to reduce the exposure of your infant to infant formula by either fully or partially relying on breastfeeding.
Okay. Okay. So this is the ultimate solution.
And
Of
even if the infant formulas are toxic metals free, again, it doesn't mean that the baby will not get the toxic metals from other sources. After all, they are present in the air that we breathe. So this is just
uh,
one source of contamination.
and not only in the air, they're also present in foods, in particular foods from also from what
Exactly.
I saw in the study. I wanted to ask, the infant formula, was it also studied in other countries to also analyze whether or not there were also these metals?
Yes, but
So,
for the sake of time, I couldn't present them here. If we look at our results compared to other countries, I would say we are in the middle. Like many countries are worse than us, but also many countries are better than us. Again, it has to do with how stringent the regulations are when it comes to infant formula imports. Um,
mm-hmm,
so you can see that in developing countries and poor countries, the toxic metals and infant formulas were high. بينما in
mm,
developed countries, the levels were acceptable. The only difference is the surveillance programs by the governments.
okay, okay. Let's hope that we can be able to better control for them in Lebanon. The government can do more work in that regard. We just have one question, which is, what do you think about humanoid saccharide that is nowadays included in many infant formulas?
Uh, it's allowed. It's allowed. Now it's controversial. It's the topic hasn't been assessed fully. Like I would say personally, there is no problem with it because it was approved by the European Food Safety Authority. So this
Mm,
would give like a sense of or a feeling of security in this regard. But few studies are challenging this fact. Until then, I would say there is no problem with it
okay.
because since EFSA approved it, it means that they did extensive studies on it. Now,
Okay.
in case additional studies will show that there is anything wrong with this particular ingredient, then I would say the EFSA would ban it. But until now, there is like no problem with it.
Okay, okay. Just one more thing regarding the foods. Are there any foods to detox from heavy metals? Are there any foods that you can detox from the heavy
Okay,
metals
okay.
that are
So
contained?
now, when it comes to toxic metals, your
Mm,
liver is highly involved in the detoxification part. Okay,
okay.
I need to close. Yes.